Hi, I'm Kyle House, the Automatic Transmission Product Specialist with EGP. The purpose of this video is to give you a basic understanding of the principles and components that are inside an automatic planetary type transmission. The subject transmission is out of Terry Beefcake Reeves' 2011 Ford Mustang GT. This vehicle dynoed at over 1,000 horsepower and 830 foot-pounds of torque at the tires. This last NMRA season, he made 90 plus successful wide open throttle quarter-mile runs on our prototype 6R80 Stage 2 frictions that Patrick Irvine from Dynex and myself co-developed. We're very pleased with the results, and I would like to share them with you. How are you doing? I'm Kyle House with Exedy Global Parts. We're about to work on a 6R80 transmission out of 2011 Mustang. It has some of our prototype clutches in it. After we disassemble this transmission, we're going to show you some of the basic principles behind an automatic transmission and some of the components. That's what I like to see.
Close up.
This is the valve body. I'm removing the case connector. Here we have the B clutch, or the 3.5 reverse clutch, at 1,000 horsepower through an entire NMRA season. They look pretty good.
And the steels are kind of dark. Why?
These steels I had salt bath nitrided as a prototype steel to try out the process and performance application on this transmission.
What's that?
This is the 1, 2, 3, 4 drum, or the A clutch drum. The E clutch drum is housed inside of this assembly. I'll pull this snap ring apart so we can get the actual drum assembly apart. Here we have the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutches. Basically, Ford calls it their forward clutch. ZF calls it their A clutch. Once again, look very good. Through an entire season at 1,000 horsepower. This is the E-clutch drum. Ford calls it the overdrive clutch. It's on in 4th, 5th, and 6th gear. Again, look very good for the abuse that this transmission has seen over the season. No burning whatsoever. This clutch takes a lot of abuse on the drag strip. Four, 5, 6 clutch hub. I wanted to make sure we didn't see any twisting of the splines. Looks very good. No play in the splines for the 4, 5, 6 hub. No stripping. This is where I had previously modified the direct drum for oil for a prototype bushing. No wear. No twisting of the splines. A little bit of hot spotting, not much.
It's hard to get something to hold up to that much horsepower.
I'm actually pretty impressed with it that it's made it through a season. Your low mechanical diode. This is our low clutches. Look very good. That's it. That's a unit torn down. I'm going to take apart the pump, check the condition of it out.
Flip it over. Or just looking kind of like to see. That's the part that you see from the outside when the transmission's just sitting there.
This is the front seal. If you have a customer ask you about a front seal for a transmission, that's what it is. It's where the torque converter hub goes into the pump. Here we're going to reassemble the pump assembly. This is the pump body. Has the front seal. It seals against the converter hub. This particular transmission uses a roller bearing instead of a pump bushing for the converter hub. These are the pump gears. They're driven by the torque converter hub, which engages these lugs. This acts as the heart of the transmission and supplies the fluid for the unit. This is the pump stator. These splines go inside the converter, engage the stator inside the torque converter. This is a selective shim used to adjust end play. These are sealing rings. These are metal interlocking sealing rings. These come in the overhaul kits. This is to separate the fluid from exhausting past these ring lands and directs the fluid into this feed passage. Here we're installing the pump gears inside the pump body, the outer pump gear. This is what is called a priming crescent to help the pump pick up prime. With the torque converter hub comes in and engages these drive lugs. It spins this pump with engine RPM. It will suck fluid up through one of these pockets, compress it, and deposit it into this other pocket, which moves through the pump and will bring the fluid from the suction side to the pressure side and distribute it through the transmission. These are all the new sealing rings that come in your typical transmission overhaul kit. These sealing rings prevent fluid from leaking into passages where it's not supposed to be. This is what they call a steel interlocking type sealing ring. The new one that's in the overhaul kit. This is what they call a scarf type, a scarf cut Teflon sealing ring. These are also Teflon scarf cut type sealing rings. I'm pre-sizing them.
make it less likely to cut them during assembly. That's all the sealing rings.
What do they seal up against?
Sealing rings seal inside of bores, such as down in a stator. There are smooth lands that the sealing rings will seal up against. Pressure distribution sleeves. Sealing ring will run here on either side of these apply holes to keep the hydraulic fluid from leaking out from either side.
Kind of explain a little bit about how an automatic transmission gear train works. Then I have the gear train stacked up as it would sit inside the transmission, and there are brake clutches and driving clutches that drive different elements of the gear train in order to get the different gear ratios. For instance, if you're in low gear, you notice the output shaft spins very slowly. Now, whenever you go to change a gear ratio, it will hold another element. Say it will hold this direct drum. You have a much faster gear ratio. By holding different elements with different clutches, this is how it achieves different gear ratios through the planetary. That's the basic principle behind a planetary automatic transmission. This is a compound planetary gear set, also known as a Ravenel gear set. It's comprised of actually two planetary gears built into the same carrier, which has two different sun gears, so they can turn at different speeds. Smaller sun gear and a larger sun gear. That will allow you to get multiple gear ratios out of the same planetary. In this drum, we have an example of what they call a simple planetary gear set, or a Simpson planetary gear. It has the sun gear inside of the planetary gears. It works exactly like it sounds. The planetary gears revolve around the sun gear. These planetary gears drive this ring gear, which is what provides another different gear ratio. Depending on what element is held, depends on what the gear ratio is. This is the valve body assembly, disassembled for cleaning. These are pressure control solenoids for each individual gear or clutch pack. It'll have its own pressure control solenoid so it can control oncoming and offgoing pressures. It has valves. Fluid pressure acts on these valves to move the valve from a closed position to an open position, to move fluid through different tracks to the different clutch packs.
These are check balls. There are 8 check balls in this valve body. Whenever pressure comes from underneath it, it will seal off a hole in the separator plate to prevent from leaking fluid into a circuit where it's not supposed to be. These are check valves that are spring loaded that keep fluid from leaking into this circuit until enough pressure is applied to compress the spring. That's the internals of the valve body. Here we're about to perform the final assembly on the transmission. I have the case and the holder clean, ready to go. Start off the output shaft rear ring gear assembly. The output carrier. Sun gear assembly. Low reverse clutch pack, or the D clutch. Then I went end plate, friction, steel plate, friction, steel plate, friction, steel plate, friction, steel plate, friction, end up with a steel plate on top, and our waved cushion plate. We have our low diode, a diode or a roller clutch or a sprag is a race with an element that will only allow motion to turn one way. It locks the other way. It doesn't allow a unit to turn in reverse.
So what fits on the outside of it?
This is where it splines into the case.
And then what about the moving part?
This splines into the output carrier. Has an anti-clunk spring when going into low or going into first gear, so this doesn't rattle in the case. You can see it over there. Keeps tension on it so it doesn't rattle. center support. Our 2/6 clutch assembly, or C clutch. If you notice, it has a key in it. A key over here that coincides with notches in the case to keep it from turning for location purposes. Big tapered snap ring assembly helps keep the center support seated into the case. We have our direct or B clutch assembly. We have our front gear train and front clutch and shaft assembly. Finally, we have our pump assembly. This particular model uses no gasket. It was important I made sure that these surfaces were flat, free of burrs. Now that we have the unit completely assembled, we're going to go back and re-air check all of the clutch packs and make sure that we don't have any leakage before we install the valve body or Mechatronic assembly. Here I'm air checking the C clutch or 2/6 clutch. Very little air pressure to apply it. Seals good. Here, air checking the D clutch or low reverse clutch. Here, we're air checking the B clutch or 3/5 reverse clutch. This is a 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch. This is a 4, 5, 6 clutch or E clutch. Going to install the yoke onto the output shaft. This is what transfers the power to the drive shaft. We're going to check park. Park holds. This actuator rod actually engages the parking gear. Here we have an example of a torque converter. Torque converter halves are welded together. It's a sealed unit. This is where it bolts to the flex plate that is bolted to the crankshaft. This is the pilot that centers the torque converter in the back of the crankshaft. This is the hub, which also drives the pump gears. This is where the front seal rides. If we take it apart, this half of the converter with the pump drive hub is called the pump, or also called the impeller. This spins at engine RPM because it is welded to the back of the converter that is bolted to the flex plate. As it is spinning, the fluid is moved through these vanes centrifugally to the outside and forced into the blades of the turbine. Well, this is a type of fluid coupler. As this spins, moves the fluid into the turbine, it causes the turbine to spin, which is attached to the input shaft of the transmission. The difference in these two speeds, what the pump is turning and what the turbine is turning, is a converter efficiency, or what they would refer to as a stall speed. The angles of the blades will change the stall speed. The other piece of a torque converter is called the stator. The stator's job is to redirect this fluid that is flowing through the turbine, change direction, and act as a force of torque multiplication on the pump itself. So it actually generates torque multiplication. The stall speed of the converter, which is basically the slip speed between the driving pump or the impeller and the turbine, is the reason in an automatic equipped car you are able to put it in drive with your foot on the brake without stalling the engine. As with a standard, obviously if you release the clutch, then the engine will stall. This slip or stall speed in between the turbine and the impeller
is why you're able to do that.